in terms of context, in terms of being present in different environments. So let's say you have your family life. Let's say you have the work version of you as a professional. Maybe you have a different version. In fact, I would argue that in some sense you have a different you depending on who you're talking to, even if it's different friends that you
Yeah, I
might,
love that. I
right?
I I don't love the effect, but I love that you said that. I believe it too.
it's
Yeah.
it's it's interesting, isn't it? I would even say that I think people feel this. So here's an example. You're at a party and you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone. And it might not even be, it might be a kind of a heart to heart, but it might not be deeply personal. It might not be something you're embarrassed about. But then someone else kind of comes over and joins in on the discussion. And then there all of a sudden it's like there's this there's this effect that both of you that were engaged in the conversation can
Mm.
feel where it's like, okay, let's maybe back up a little bit here. So it's
Yeah, yeah,
interesting,
yeah.
but I'm just kind of curious how you would think about this, because the question is that still you? Is that still the genuine you? Or is that a facade? Or, is context, can you, I guess, put context in the filter and change what side you let out of you? And is that disingenuous or not?
It's look, I do think that we are expressions of our environment. I'm going to show my hand here. And I know that there will be some of your viewers who will be concerned about me saying that in terms of the aforementioned position from Seneca, let's say, where he will say, don't be steered by the masses. Don't be steered by your company, even. Remain true to whatever it is about you. And the reason that I think we are inescapably, inherently products of our environment is not just from a sociological point of view, but it's from that classical Stoic position where we are our environment. We are a fragment of our environment because let's remember in Stoicism, the environment is God. The environment, and I don't mean this in a transcendental way, of course,
Yep.
everyone will know but the environment is, or the world is, this physical, rational being in Stoicism. And we are that. We are one part, one expression, one fragment, according to Epictetus. Uh, we are one part of that. We are always an expression of it. And depending on how deterministic you want to get, will determine how, pardon the pun, how far you think we can self author ourselves despite our context, despite our environment. I think every Stoic will agree that, or every person reading Stoic philosophy will agree that one of the beauties of the philosophy is that it says, despite what's going on around you, you can reflect on your perspective, as you said. You use that word perspective. You can reflect on your perspective on it, and you can change that perspective. However, what you're asking is, when someone comes over at a party and our personality seems to change, or our feeling around the situation or our perspective seems to change, does that mean that we're now a contingent form of ourselves and we've lost sight of our essential or true self?
Right.
And I think that our essential or true self, according to the Stoics, is our mind. That's really all there is. And that mind, whilst we do have some control over it, it is still a piece of something that is situated beyond us, which gives us one foot in each camp. Our true or essential self is our localized version, our mind in the case of Stoic vernacular. But our mind is also something that is shared. And that word is very important, shared with something beyond ourselves. And so this is just my perspective, and you'll be given other perspectives from other guests. But my perspective is that sharing of our individual mind and the universal mind means that our true essential self is never, ever an isolated, non contextual, non environmental feature of our being. It's always, always shared. And yes, in this latest book I've written, I've really, really dug deep
Hmm.
into all of the ancient eras to show that I believe that when the Stoics argue that we have control over a perspective on things. It's a control that is never isolated. It's a control that is never down to us alone, but it's something in which we participate rather than something that we possess.
Yeah, and I would actually agree with that because I think dichotomy of control. I think that word control often implies complete control. And I actually don't think that's what the Stoics really meant by that. I think they meant that there's a lot of things that you have. I think influence is a better word. It's like you have
Yeah.
influence over certain things, but there's some things you
Hmm.
have absolutely no influence over. Those things don't even worry about. But there are things that you do actually have influence over, and maybe you should focus on that more so. But it's curious too because we're often in a world now where you hear things like it's almost like there is this it's seen as a strength to be vulnerable and show yourself to everyone.
Hmm.
But it's interesting as well because you're going to be different, say, with your partner than you are with your child, than you are with your boss, than you are with your coworker, than you are with a friend, than you are with who's giving your coffee at Tim Hortons. So, and I think I got to keep bringing in Tim Hortons here. They're not sponsoring this podcast, by the way. but but there also is a huge benefit to exclusivity. So there's something about having, let's say, one romantic partner, and you're going to share things with them, mostly, let's say, your life, your day to day
Hmm.
life, that it's not even that you can't, you physically, you're unable to share that with the rest of the world, but it also creates this bond that I don't think you get without that. It's like if you're going to share that with everyone, then what makes up that particular connection at the end of the day?
This is a great point. So, if we think about Heracles' imperative regarding the circles of connection, and he impels us to draw in people that we aren't familiar with, right? So it's exactly what you're saying, and Aristotle says the same thing.
Mhm.
This idea that Heracles says that we should try to treat people who we're not familiar with as though they were our relatives, and we should treat people who we've never even met as though they're people who live in our same, village or something, and bring everyone in a little bit closer. So he says that in one regard, but then in another regard, he says we should not forsake the intimacy of our most personal relationships and our most close familial relationships, and we should not forsake them for this other project, let's say. And Aristotle says the second thing as well. He says that we should not spread ourselves so thinly that we forget that our most important relationships are these ones that we share in day to day, friends. And this is important because it shows that there's this real distinction, a real practical distinction. Let's just talk about the Stoics in terms of cosmopolitanism, in terms of how far we spread our attention amongst our fellow beings. Because Stoicism is a practical philosophy, and it would be impractical for us to try to treat everyone in the world with the same attention. First of all, we wouldn't have the time, we wouldn't have the attention, the energy, etc.
Right.
So the Stoics are very conscious of being practical, and Heracles on this point, whilst he does wax lyrical about creating a bigger community of people with whom you're familiar, he also doesn't lose sight of what should be most important day to day, which is fostering these incredibly intense localized relationships. And like you said, you can't share everything with everyone. Um, Maybe the notion of sharing there is relevant only in the sense of what we have in common, rather than what we go out of our way to share.